wasn't ready to build this, but I certainly didn't have a choice. I had just got back from a trip dealing with my job, and I was pretty excited to see my plants. I left my son on plant duty while I was out, and he helped out quite a bit. There were a few issues that I needed to address. I remember when I came back and I saw the cucumbers that they grew a lot while I was out of town. I knew at the same time I had to do something about them. I did take some time to inspect the other plants, and they were growing just fine. I was happy that I didn't see roots coming out of them. So here I was working on the garden bed, and it wasn't my first time, but I had got a little bit more comfortable making these. So I was just prepping gear, making the measurements, and I didn't record everything. I did have to improvise on space because my workbench inside the garage was covered with many other things that I was working on. Other items I had purchased for the garden, and not to mention, my kids had toys all over the space, so I had to make do with what I had. It was this moment right here when I definitely recognized that I needed to have my workbench because it was starting to drift as I was cutting. I was pretty tired when I was actually doing this job, but I knew I was against the time, and not to mention it was getting pretty hot, so I had to get this project going. And I wanted to be able to prep for it later on tonight where the temperatures came down, so that it wouldn't be too much stress on the cucumbers when it come time to transplant them. It didn't really take me long to set up this bed because I had original drawings for the watermelon bed and trellis that I had set up. There's going to be a slight difference with this one. The trellis, I wanted to change the design because I had struggled with the way the cucumbers were starting to bloom, and I had seen other content where people were struggling with getting their cucumbers. So I wanted to create a trellis that had a little bit of a pitch to it. I remember laughing at this part because I recognized how important it was to have a mat for my knees, because I'm getting older now and I can't do these projects all the time on my knees. Same as before, this part here was pretty simple too. I didn't have to think about it too much. I did know I wanted to make sure I drove the screws in a little bit deeper just so they can grip. I did come across a little bit of a challenge here, and it wasn't because I didn't know what I was doing, but you'll see a few seconds from now. I had a little bit of trouble with a drill bit. It was pretty nerve-wracking at that point because it happens when you don't think about it, that you break a drill bit.
Oh, come on, man.
I did laugh at this moment because I was just on the move. I was ready to get done. It was hot, and that was the last thing I wanted to have hold me up. At this point, I was doing something different to the bed. I wanted to add some more support for the trellis setup. This trellis setup was going to have an angle to it. So in the future, I wanted there to be an option that I could take the trellis off if I just wanted to change it up or revamp with a new design. The same thing for this bed. I added chicken wire on the bottom. Last year I had some issues with my hostas. They were dying and then they were easy to pull up. And I think there might have been a rodent that was burrowing through the soil. Because I can tell you, looking back at it, it definitely was a pain that everything that I was planting was getting eaten from the bottom. I hadn't fully thought out the design in the area, so I was adjusting left and right. My plan was to also place some marigold and some zinnias around it, so I was trying to keep the spacing in between the beds. Here I was getting it set up for the trellis. I didn't have this part planned out, but I was taking measurements. I actually improvised on this one, but overall I think it came out pretty well. Here was another challenge with improvising, because I could have used my workbench as a place for leveling, and I could have used the clamps to hold a lot better than this makeshift table. But it still turned out pretty good. If you have never done this kind of work before, you'd be surprised how much of a challenge it really is. I felt a sense of accomplishment after I put these pieces together. From an amateur standpoint, I was pretty surprised by it, and it was starting to give me ideas for other things I wanted to do in my garden. At this point, there definitely was a sense of relief, because I was more than halfway through. I was just trying to pilot drill holes to get ready for the screws. Only thing I needed to prep for was the welded wire, which, by the way, is not that bad to use. My first thought was using cattle panel, but I don't have a truck, and it's not one of those things that is easily shipped to you. So the welded wire will get the job done. Only thing I needed to do was press in the side so I wouldn't scrape myself. After that, I was getting it in position. It had a pretty tight, snug fit, but that's exactly what I was looking for. I was putting a few screws on each side, and it was pretty easy work at this point. Once again, another moment of relief because I was almost finished. This was my 5th trellis setup. I started to fill up with branches because it's a good way to save up on soil. I actually was running low. I ended up going to a neighbor's house who just cut down a tree. I was grabbing some more items from there. Now, when people generally do their beds, I know there's always a question about what kind of material is put in, how fresh it is, which are really good points because that does matter. I wanted to make sure that it wouldn't create too much of an exothermic effect and would burn the roots of my plants. So I thought long and hard about this. And with it being a 12-inch bed, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Right here, I was watering it down because I know once this material decomposes, the bed is going to shrink a little. So I'm just going through the layering process, and I've been doing this for a while, but it doesn't mean that I won't make mistakes. I'm quite sure somebody will catch it. All I can hope for is that somebody give me good advice that I can use to watch out for in the future. Just more layering, and I'm trying to tamper down a little bit of the soil because I really don't want it to shift downward too much. I think I used about 3 or 4 bags here, which wasn't bad for the price, but that's why it's so important to make sure you layer because soil can get pretty expensive. Now the cheaper route would be to use topsoil, but nobody has time to filter through that, and I've seen so many things in topsoil, and I don't want to wrestle with just trying to filter that to save a few dollars. I'm getting ready to transplant the cucumber. I was growing it in these biodegradable cups, and I've had some experience in the past that if you don't cut them open sometime, that the roots will get root bound and there will be some issues, so I try to cut open the bottom just so they can spread. Now these plants themselves were a little bit wilted, and I think it was just due to the fact that the water kept wicking through the cups. So that's another thing I had to worry about when I came back into town, but they held up pretty good. As you can see, one is already tall enough to reach the trellis, so that's great. But I'm going to have to spend time over the next few days training it up so it doesn't take up too much space. I was so happy with looking at how this turned out. And I hope that this could be motivation for anybody else who has ideas and may not be tool or mechanically savvy. I have really no experience with
framing and carpentry work, and I have plenty of friends who are really good at this. But I would encourage anybody, get you a hobby. It's very important to life, and there are enough hardships. It's nice to come up with something that you can have and call your own and be able to see the fruit that comes from it. I knew that I had to build it eventually. I just didn't realize how quickly the cucumbers would decide for me. The garden has a way of reminding me that growth doesn't wait until we're ready. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just stop planning and start building, and trust the process from there. Today it was the trellis. Tomorrow it would be something else.